So the explanation of the creation of man and women is simply that man is created to tend the garden, woman is created to be his partner, and everything is great. They're just going to eat the fruit and the vegetables as they grow, everything except for the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. And when the woman is shown by the snake that the tree is, that the fruit on the tree, it looks good, and the snake tells her, if you eat from it, you will be like gods, knowing good and bad. She thinks, okay, I'll give it a try, and she eats it, and then it's all downhill from there, right? She eats it, her eyes are open, she gives it to her man with her, his eyes are open, they realize they're naked, which in a lot of ancient and other cultural contexts is a sign, what differentiates us from the animals. We know we're self-aware, and clothing and bread and beer are usually the markers in ancient cultures for, culture. That's what makes us civilized. That's what differentiates us from the animals. So here you have clothing as a marker of some kind of new knowledge, and they dress, and then God finds out that they have disobeyed his command not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and he says to himself or to the other divine beings, it's not entirely clear in the text, we better kick them out of Eden, because what if they now eat from the tree of life and also live forever? Then their status is in question. If they have the knowledge and they have the immortality, then the snake was right. They kind of are being like gods. So God decides to banish them from the garden, and along with that, as punishment, the man will now have to work the soil in order to yield any food, as opposed to when he tended the garden and he didn't have to work that hard. The woman's punishment is, for disobeying is going to be that she has to be submissive to the man, that he will dominate her. And the wording is really interesting there in Genesis 3:16, because what it says is that he will that she will have pain and suffering in childbirth, but she will still desire her man, presumably sexually. Even though it's going to hurt to have kids, she's still going to want to have sex with her husband, and he will dominate her. And one of the things that we comment on with this description is that there's a movement from a state of nature, a state of, there's a man, there's a woman, there's a garden, there's food, there's animals, and it's all good, and it's all fine. And then this nature is disrupted with the knowledge that leads to what we could call cultural knowledge. And now things have to be different. And this is the way things are going to be. That in nature, men and women are more or less equal. There's no discrepancy, there's no status, and there's certainly no command that the woman be subservient. It's only in the state of culture that things are pronounced to be this way. And we also make a distinction between what we take as a descriptive text, that is describing the world of the authors as they knew it. In their world, women were subservient to men. Men dominated women in social and cultural areas, and particularly in political areas. And this is the way things were. So here you have the etiology of how it got to be this way.
It seems to me that the Garden of Eden, as a mythology, demonstrates why it is that we almost have accepted the mutual and distinctive curses, for men and for women, respective. And that something about the accepting of the story of the Garden of Eden seems to me like the writings of people, not the authority of God.
Of course, religious people who read the text will read that differently than a scholar like myself who will say, well, yes, someone, a person wrote this down. Now, I always qualify that by saying that doesn't mean that it didn't, originate from the divine, but as far as my scholarly methods of analysis are concerned, I have to say that a person wrote it. because I don't have any way of analyzing academically whether or not something is authored by God. But I can certainly look at human productions and human writings from this culture and from other culture, and I can tell you how we can read those writings in order to understand the cultures and the people that produce them. And that's what I'm doing with this text.
So what are you left with about the Garden of Eden? What are you personally left with now?
Well, one of the things that I like to talk about with this story, and there are many. I actually once taught a whole semester just on this story. It was fantastic. One of the things is the idea that I alluded to earlier, which is the difference between a descriptive text and a prescriptive text, and often they overlap. I mean, often a story from an ancient culture will describe the way things are and justify the way things are in order to continue that way of life. And many ancient texts do this. I don't think that, whether from a religious perspective or from an academic perspective, this text needs to be read that way. I think that we can read it as a reflection of the author's own cultural context, that this is, that men dominate women. First of all, that men and women pair off heterosexually and leave their parents. That's his first observation, and
right.
then he explains why. And secondly, men and women wear clothes, and here's why. Snakes don't have legs, and here's why. People are mortal, and here's why, et cetera, et cetera. These are all of the etiologies in the story, and here's one more. Men dominate women in society, and here's why. And the fact that he is explaining this, first of all, reflects that this is the way his society works, but secondly, also reflects, I think, a belief on his part that this wasn't always the way things were and isn't necessarily the way things need to be. And I think that anybody who is religiously inspired by the Bible can take that and take it in different directions than many of those people who are religiously inspired by the Bible generally tend to take it. That is, here's the word of God, women are to be subservient, end of story. I don't think it necessarily needs to be read that way when it's read in its context.
I think that some of the fall from grace and men should dominate women, I think that there's been broad-scale confusion, too, for many Christians that got married, are unhappily married, and are seeking divorce or seeking to change the nature of the relationship, but won't because it's in the Bible that they're supposed to expect that whatever this is already commanded, and it's okay, and it's licensed. I've seen friends of mine just not able to leave a dysfunctional and abusive and inappropriate relationship because stuff like this has been translated as being what the Bible says.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about the Bible is it can be read, because it's written by so many different people over such a long period of time, you can find a lot of contradicting opinions in it. And what people don't point to is the fact that divorce is perfectly legal and part of life in biblical Israel. And it continues to be legal and part of life in the rabbinic period. And in the history of Judaism, it continues to be legal and part of life as it is necessary. It's the New Testament that has a couple of injunctions against divorce, and they, I would say, they are also very much tied to their cultural context. I'm a little less comfortable speaking about the New Testament simply because I'm not an expert in it in the way that I am in the Hebrew Bible.
Understood. I liked how you began talking about the fact that you say we're symmetrical. We think in twos. Talk about that for a moment, and then I want to talk about the women of the Bible.
Well, one of the things that we sort of noticed as we were writing this is that there's always an either or, the way that we tend to think about issues. And by we, I mean primarily 21st century North Americans, but we also see this in the biblical period, that, you are a man or you are a woman, and you are a slave or you are a free person. That, this sort of division into twos is something that goes back culturally to probably before the Bible.